Anthony, a night security guard at a hospital in the busy heart of New York City, stifled a yawn as he scanned the empty lobby. It was past midnight, and the hospital had settled into its quiet, eerie stillness, the kind that blankets a place meant for rest and recovery but carries an undertone of tension and urgency. Leaning back in his chair, he was about to take a sip of his lukewarm coffee when something caught his eye near the entrance. A scruffy-looking dog had wandered in, pushing through the automatic doors with an almost determined stride. Anthony frowned. Dogs didn't just stroll into hospitals in the middle of the night, especially not dogs carrying something. The animal, a medium-sized mutt with matted fur and soulful brown eyes, had a worn, tattered blanket clutched gently in its mouth. The blanket, faded and frayed at the edges, looked out of place against the sterile white tiles of the lobby floor. "Hey, little guy," Anthony murmured, setting his coffee aside as he rose from his chair. He approached the dog slowly, his footsteps echoing softly. The dog, rather than retreating, held its ground, fixing Anthony with a gaze that was surprisingly calm, almost purposeful. "Are you lost?" Anthony asked, crouching a few feet away. The dog's eyes didn't waver. They were locked onto him with a look that was both pleading and insistent. Anthony's brow furrowed. He had worked in security long enough to know when something was out of place, and this felt off. Why would a stray dog come into the hospital holding a blanket? And why was it looking at him like that? The dog took a hesitant step forward, dropping the blanket at Anthony's feet before sitting back on its haunches, watching him intently. Anthony looked down at the blanket and saw something unexpected. A small, delicate hand protruding from its folds. His breath caught in his throat. "God," he whispered, reaching out to gingerly lift a corner of the blanket. His suspicions were confirmed. A tiny baby lay nestled within, its skin alarmingly pale and lips chapped, as if it hadn't been fed or hydrated in days. "Jesus," Anthony muttered, grabbing his radio. "This is Anthony in the lobby. I need medical staff down here, now. We've got an abandoned infant. And a dog?" The voice on the other end crackled. "Come again. Anthony? I know how it sounds. Just get down here," he replied, voice tense. As he waited for help, Anthony looked back at the dog, who hadn't moved, watching the scene with a quiet, almost resigned patience. For reasons he couldn't explain, Anthony felt a strange pang of respect for the animal, as if it were somehow involved. Moments later, the rapid footsteps of medical staff echoed through the lobby as they rushed toward him. One of them, a nurse named Emily, gasped when she saw the baby. She exchanged a quick, bewildered look with Anthony. "Where did you?" she began. But Anthony just gestured to the dog. "It brought the baby in." Emily's eyes widened, shifting between the baby and the dog. "Well, aren't you something special?" she murmured to the dog, as if it could understand. Anthony nodded, almost in awe. "Yeah, I think it knew exactly what it was doing." Emily knelt beside the baby, gently lifting the tiny bundle from the worn blanket with a practiced but tender touch. She had seen her fair share of difficult cases in her years as a nurse, but this was a first, a baby delivered to the hospital's doorstep by a stray dog. The infant was fragile, visibly undernourished, and her heart clenched as she held the child close, cradling him with the care he so desperately needed. "Anthony, call the NICU. They need to prepare for an immediate assessment," she instructed, her voice calm but urgent. Anthony, already rattled, nodded and stepped back, reaching for his radio again. The dog, meanwhile, watched Emily's every movement, its brown eyes following her with an almost human expression of concern. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the animal understood what was happening, that it was here for a reason. She reached down, giving the dog a gentle scratch behind its ears. "Good boy or girl. You did something incredible tonight," she whispered. The dog's tail gave a faint wag, though its gaze remained fixed on the baby, as if to reassure itself that the infant was safe. Emily felt an odd sense of connection with the animal, a connection rooted in the shared instinct to protect this vulnerable little life. Her heart pounded with a mix of shock and urgency as she lifted her eyes to Anthony. "I can't believe this. I mean, a dog bringing in a baby," she said softly, still in disbelief. "What's the world coming to?" Anthony, looking almost as overwhelmed, shrugged. I don't know, Emily, but that dog. He came in here with a purpose, like he knew exactly what he was doing. I think he saved that kid's life. Just then, a team of nurses and a pediatrician burst through the doors. Dr. Martinez, a seasoned physician with a calm, no-nonsense demeanor, immediately took control of the situation, barking orders to the nurses. Let's get this baby to the NICU, stat. Emily, you're with me. I want vitals, fluids, and a full examination, Dr. Martinez ordered, his tone brisk and focused. Emily nodded, holding the baby securely as they moved toward the NICU. As she passed the dog, she hesitated, looking back at him one last time. Stay here, okay? She whispered, not knowing if he would understand, but feeling compelled to say something. To her surprise, the dog simply lay down by the entrance, resting its head on its paws, as if it intended to wait until the baby's fate was known. As they entered the NICU, Emily focused on her duties, her hands steady despite the racing thoughts in her mind. While the nurses busied themselves preparing for the infant's arrival, she carefully laid him on the bed, brushing a thumb over his tiny fist. He was still, too still for her liking, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Dr. Martinez examined the baby with a discerning eye, then turned to Emily. Dehydrated, probably hasn't eaten in at least a day, and will need to test for infections or any pre-existing conditions. But he's strong. I think he'll pull through. Emily exhaled, feeling a rush of relief but still deeply shaken. She had always known her work could be intense, but this night had hit her differently. As she glanced back through the glass walls of the NICU, she saw the dog still waiting by the door, its eyes fixed on the room. Dr. Martinez noticed her gaze and raised an eyebrow. Is that the rescuer? She nodded. Yeah, that dog brought him in. It's like it knew the baby was in trouble. Well, I've seen a lot in my career, but this one's new, Dr. Martinez replied, rubbing his chin. Maybe he was just drawn by instinct, but either way, it's nothing short of a miracle. Emily's eyes softened. Miracle or fate? I don't know, but I'm grateful. Later, as the baby began receiving 4 fluids and was stabilized, Emily left the NICU, her exhaustion catching up with her. She found Anthony standing in the lobby, still staring at the dog, who hadn't moved from his spot. He's still here, Anthony said, nodding toward the animal. What do you think we should do with him? Emily looked at the dog, feeling a strange tug in her heart. Let him stay, I think. He's here for a reason. And with that, the night moved forward, with the baby safe and the dog keeping a faithful watch, their fates now inexplicably intertwined. The hospital began to wake as dawn approached, the early morning light casting a soft glow through the large glass windows of the NICU. Emily was by the baby's side, her hand resting on his tiny leg as she monitored his heart rate and breathing. A few hours had passed since the initial rush, and though the baby was still fragile, his vitals had stabilized, much to her relief. She couldn't shake the image of the dog sitting outside the NICU doors, faithfully waiting through the night. She decided to take a moment to check on him, her heart heavy with the unanswered questions surrounding the baby's sudden appearance. As she walked back through the quiet halls toward the lobby, her steps slowed when she saw the animal. The dog was lying down, his eyes still trained on the NICU doors, as if sensing where the child was. Anthony noticed her approach and stepped forward. The pup hasn't moved an inch, he murmured. Just sat there, staring at the doors. It's like he's guarding that baby. Emily nodded, feeling a surge of empathy for the dog. I think he really is, she said softly. She crouched down and extended her hand, letting the dog sniff her fingers before gently scratching behind his ears. Hey boy, you're quite the hero, aren't you? The dog's eyes met hers, and for a fleeting moment, she felt a connection, a mutual understanding that transcended words. She noticed something odd about the collar around his neck. Though faded and frayed, it bore a barely legible tag with a name. She squinted, trying to make out the letters. Gus, she murmured. Well, Gus, looks like you've been around for a while. As she gently pulled the blanket he had brought from the lobby floor, she noticed something else. Nestled within the folds of the blanket, she found a small, handwritten note, crumpled and stained. Her heart began to race as she carefully unfolded it, her hands trembling slightly. The note was brief, scrawled in rushed handwriting, and it read, "Please take care of him. I have no one else." Emily's heart broke as she read the words. The desperation in the note's simplicity hit her deeply, and she could almost feel the fear and sorrow of whoever had left the baby. She could only imagine the painful decision that had driven someone to abandon their child in such a manner, hoping that the hospital would offer safety, that maybe someone would show the kindness the parent couldn't give themselves. Anthony peered over her shoulder, reading the note, his face a mix of sympathy and sadness. "Do you think it was his mother?" he asked quietly. "Probably," Emily replied, swallowing the lump in her throat. Maybe she thought this was his best chance. But why would she leave him with a dog? Maybe Gus was the only one she trusted, Anthony offered, glancing at the dog. "He seems protective." Emily reached down, stroking Gus's fur. "You're a brave soul, aren't you, Gus?" she whispered, feeling a tear slip down her cheek. "You really cared for that little one." Gus gave her hand a soft lick, as if to reassure her. She could feel the weight of his loyalty, a devotion that went beyond what she would have expected from a stray dog. In that moment, she felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility, not only for the baby but for Gus too. Turning back to Anthony, she squared her shoulders. "I want to find out everything I can about this baby. There has to be more to this story." Anthony nodded in agreement, sensing the determination in her voice. "I'll check with local shelters, see if anyone's reported a lost dog named Gus. Maybe we can trace where he came from." "That's a start," Emily replied. "And in the meantime, I'll talk to social services. This baby deserves a chance, and it's clear Gus isn't going anywhere without him." They stood there in silence for a moment, feeling the weight of the situation. Emily had encountered hardship in her work before, but this was different. This wasn't just a medical case. This was a story of survival, resilience, and an unlikely protector who had refused to give up. As the morning light grew stronger, she knew that this was just the beginning of a journey that would test her resolve and, perhaps, change her life. Emily's pulse raced as she returned to the NICU, where the baby lay nestled in the medical cradle, a fragile little being who had barely begun his life. She couldn't shake the image of the note in her mind, of the handwriting that felt haunted and desperate. This child had been loved enough to be brought here, to a place where he could be safe, yet abandoned in a way that tore at her heart. Gus, meanwhile, was still stationed outside the NICU, his vigilant gaze never leaving the door. Emily glanced back at him, touched by his unwavering dedication. She wished she could bring him into the NICU, but strict hospital policies prevented animals from entering. She felt a pang of guilt every time she saw him through the glass, lying patiently in the hallway, eyes focused as though he could sense the baby's presence. Inside the NICU, Dr. Martinez was already by the baby's side, running tests and monitoring his vitals. He looked up as Emily entered, his face softening slightly. "He's doing okay, all things considered," he said. "We're dealing with dehydration and malnutrition, but there's no immediate threat. This kid's a fighter." Emily felt a wave of relief, but also a tightening resolve. "Thank you, doctor," she replied, her voice filled with gratitude. "Do you think he'll recover quickly?" Dr. Martinez nodded thoughtfully. "If we can get him the nutrients and care he needs, there's a good chance he'll be just fine." But he hesitated, his eyes darkening. "If he's been neglected for long, there might be other issues, emotional trauma, developmental delays. We'll need to keep a close watch." Emily absorbed his words, feeling the gravity of the situation. She had seen neglected children before, had nursed them back to health, but this was different. This baby had arrived in such a unique way, entrusted to them by a creature with no voice, yet with a spirit that spoke volumes. The thought made her glance back at the doorway, where Gus waited with a patience that humbled her. As the day progressed, Emily stayed by the baby's side, feeding him small amounts of formula to ease him back into a regular feeding routine. She hummed softly, watching his tiny fingers flex and relax, imagining the love and fear that had compelled his mother, or father, to leave him here. Just as she was lost in thought, a soft knock at the NICU door pulled her back to reality. Anthony appeared, his face strained with a mix of concern and exhaustion. Emily, I just got off the phone with animal control and the shelters around town. No reports of a missing dog named Gus. Emily sighed, rubbing her temples. So, he really might be a stray. Just a loyal, determined stray. Yeah, and get this. According to the shelter records, there's no dog registered under that name anywhere in the area. Anthony paused, glancing toward Gus, still faithfully stationed outside. It's almost like he just appeared. Emily looked at Gus, her heart softening. Well, until we know more, I think he's earned his place here. But I don't want him out in the cold. Anthony scratched his chin, clearly thinking. We could set him up in the maintenance room. It's warm, and I'll make sure he has some food and water. Thank you, Anthony, she said gratefully. He's not just a stray to me. He's part of this now. Anthony nodded, his own attachment to the animal evident in his expression. Yeah, that dog's got heart. Maybe even more than some people I know. They shared a quiet chuckle, a small moment of lightness amidst the weight of the situation. As Emily returned to her duties, she felt a sense of purpose blooming inside her. It was as if everything in her life had led her to this exact moment. This baby, this stray dog, this act of grace wrapped in mystery. The hours slipped by, and by evening, the baby's cheeks had gained a hint of color, his breathing more even. Emily's exhaustion was apparent, but she stayed, unwilling to leave the baby's side. She was absorbed in the steady rhythm of his breathing when the door opened again, and Dr. Martinez entered, his face lined with weariness. You've been here all day, Emily, he noted gently. Go home, get some rest. She shook her head, a tired smile on her face. I can't leave him, doctor. Not tonight. Dr. Martinez observed her, a knowing glint in his eyes. You've grown attached to this little one already, haven't you? Emily hesitated, then nodded. I know it's fast, but yes, I can't help it. There's something about him. And Gus. Her voice softened. I feel like they're meant to be here with us. Dr. Martinez smiled. Maybe they are, but you'll be no good to them if you're exhausted. Go get some rest, just a few hours. I'll keep an eye on him. Reluctantly, Emily agreed, though her heart remained with the baby and his devoted guardian. As she left the NICU, she glanced once more at Gus, who had moved to the maintenance room but was still watching the hallway, as if sensing the baby's presence from afar. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that a bond had been forged that night, a bond that had yet to fully reveal its meaning. As she headed home, she whispered a quiet prayer that the baby would continue to grow stronger, that Gus would remain safe, and that somehow they'd all find the answers they sought. The next morning, Emily arrived at the hospital before sunrise, her heart pulling her back to the baby and Gus. She had barely slept, her mind racing with questions about the baby's origins, the meaning of the note, and the unlikely protector who had brought him here. As she entered the lobby, she saw Gus waiting by the door to the NICU, his gaze focused and unyielding. Good morning, Gus, she murmured, crouching down to scratch behind his ears. His tail wagged slightly, and he nudged her hand with his nose, as if welcoming her back. Emily's heart softened. She had never seen such loyalty from an animal, especially one that had seemingly wandered in from the streets. You've really attached yourself to him, haven't you? Came Anthony's voice from across the lobby. He walked over, holding a bag of dog food and a small water bowl he'd set up in the maintenance room for Gus. This guy didn't leave his spot all night. I tried to get him to rest, but he'd just wander back to the NICU doors. Emily smiled, her eyes glistening with emotion. He's watching over him, Anthony. It's like he knows exactly what's going on. Anthony nodded. I guess some things go beyond what we can explain. This dog, he's something special. She looked at Gus, who returned her gaze with those wise, knowing eyes, and felt an overwhelming gratitude for his presence. She made a silent vow to take care of him, just as he had taken care of the baby. Standing up, she walked toward the NICU, gesturing for Gus to follow her. To her surprise, he hesitated, staying rooted by the door as if he knew he wasn't allowed inside. It's okay, Gus, she whispered, understanding his reluctance. You can't come in here, but I'll make sure you're close. With a final scratch behind his ears, Emily entered the NICU, her heart lifting as she saw the baby resting peacefully. His color had improved, his breathing steadier. Dr. Martinez was already by his side, making notes on his chart. He looked up as she approached, nodding in acknowledgement. "He's a fighter," Dr. Martinez said, his tone warm. "His body is responding well to the fluids, and his vitals are stabilizing. He's still fragile, but if he keeps improving, he could make a full recovery." Emily sighed, relief washing over her. She leaned over the tiny child, gently brushing her fingers across his forehead. "Thank you," she murmured, though whether she was speaking to the baby, Dr. Martinez, or some higher power, she couldn't say. "Emily, I don't think I've ever seen you this invested in a case," Dr. Martinez observed, his voice laced with gentle curiosity. "Not that it's a bad thing, just different." She glanced at him, unsure how to put her feelings into words. "I don't know how to explain it, doctor. This baby, Gus, they found their way here in such a strange way. And that note, I can't stop thinking about the person who left him. Whoever they were, they trusted that Gus would bring him somewhere safe." Dr. Martinez nodded thoughtfully. "It does make you wonder. But whoever left him did the right thing. They gave him a chance." Emily swallowed, her voice thick with emotion. "I feel like they're both in my care now. Gus, he's not just a stray. He's more than that." Dr. Martinez studied her for a moment, then gave her a small smile. "You know, we've got a therapy dog program here at the hospital. If you're serious about Gus, I can talk to administration, see if we can make him an honorary member of the team. Maybe even allow him limited access to the NICU." Emily's eyes widened with gratitude. "You do that?" "Of course," Dr. Martinez replied, his smile widening. "I think Gus has earned his place here. Don't you?" She nodded, a warmth spreading through her. "Thank you, doctor. That would mean a lot. To both of us, I think." Later that morning, Emily found herself spending her break time outside with Gus, giving him the attention he deserved. She sat with him on a bench just outside the hospital entrance, watching him munch on a treat Anthony had brought over. As she watched him, she felt a deep sense of peace, as if they had known each other for far longer than a single day. She looked into his eyes, which were full of intelligence and understanding. "You really are a hero, Gus. I don't know how you did it, but you saved him. And I think you saved me too." Gus's tail thumped against the ground, his gaze softening as he nudged her hand with his nose, seeming to understand her words. Over the next few days, as the baby continued to grow stronger, Emily and Gus developed a rhythm. She would check on the baby during her shifts, and on her breaks, she would sit with Gus, letting him accompany her on short walks around the hospital grounds. Word of the hero dog spread quickly, and soon, nurses, doctors, and even patients stopped to give Gus a pat or a kind word. His presence brought a new lightness to the hospital, a sense of hope that radiated through its halls. And every day, Gus would return to his spot outside the NICU doors, a steadfast sentinel, watching over the child he had saved. For Emily, this unlikely friendship had become her anchor, a reminder that sometimes the bonds we form are not only unexpected but deeply meaningful. And as she looked at the baby's improving health, she knew that Gus was the silent guardian this little one had needed, and perhaps the companion she had been searching for, too. Days turned into weeks, and as the baby continued to recover, a new routine took shape in the hospital. Emily found herself growing attached, not only to the tiny life in the NICU but also to Gus, who had become a familiar face around the hospital. Staff members had taken to bringing him treats, and even patients' families found comfort in petting his soft, scruffy fur. Gus had a calming effect on everyone he met, seeming to understand when someone needed an extra dose of kindness. The baby, now officially named Liam by the hospital staff, had gained color in his cheeks, his tiny fingers now curling around Emily's finger whenever she held him. He still required monitoring, but each day brought new signs of strength, each milestone a small victory. Emily felt a deep sense of purpose in caring for him, as if the bond between them had been written long before that fateful night. In the quiet moments, Emily would talk to Liam softly, sharing her dreams for him, her hopes that he would grow up surrounded by love and kindness. She felt the stirrings of a desire she hadn't anticipated, the thought of adopting him, of giving him a permanent home. But each time the thought crossed her mind, the weight of reality pressed back. She was a single woman with a demanding job, and adoption was a monumental decision. Still, the idea lingered, taking root in her heart. One chilly autumn evening, Emily was sitting with Gus on a bench outside, watching the sun set over the city skyline. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of fallen leaves, and she absent-mindedly stroked Gus's fur as they sat together in companionable silence. "What would you think, Gus?" she asked softly, glancing down at him. "About Liam coming home with us?" Gus tilted his head, his eyes meeting hers, as if he understood every word. His tail wagged, a soft thump against the ground, and he rested his head on her knee, giving her the quiet encouragement she needed. Emily felt her resolve hardening. Maybe it was a crazy idea, but Gus's silent support bolstered her. She wanted Liam to be part of their family. As she sat there, deep in thought, Anthony strolled over, hands in his pockets. "Looks like you've found yourself a partner," he teased, nodding toward Gus. Emily chuckled, scratching Gus behind the ears. "Yeah, he's pretty great company. He keeps me grounded." Anthony nodded, his expression softening. "You know, Em, I think you'd make a great mom. I've seen the way you are with that little one." Emily's cheeks flushed, and she looked away, flustered. "It's a big responsibility, Anthony. And what if I can't give him everything he deserves?" He shrugged, giving her a gentle smile. "None of us are perfect, but love goes a long way. And you've got plenty of that to give." They sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of the conversation settling between them. Emily looked out over the horizon, feeling the pull of the unknown future. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but in her heart, she couldn't imagine her life without Liam or Gus. The next morning, Emily made her decision. She would start the adoption process, no matter how daunting it might be. She knew the path ahead would be long and complicated, filled with interviews, home visits, and endless paperwork. But she was prepared to do whatever it took. She found herself pacing outside the Office of Social Services, her hands trembling as she filled out the initial forms. As she waited to meet with a caseworker, she thought of Gus, her steady companion, waiting patiently back at the hospital. In a way, he had already helped her face so much. Her fears, her doubts, her hopes. He had been a constant reminder of the love and loyalty that drove her to take this step. After submitting the first round of paperwork, Emily returned to the hospital, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and fear. The enormity of what she was undertaking settled over her, and she knew that the journey wouldn't be simple. But the moment she looked into Liam's eyes, her doubts faded. This was the path she wanted to take. Over the following weeks, Emily and Gus continued their routine, with a new purpose guiding her every action. She spent her days caring for Liam in the NICU, her evenings filling out adoption forms, and her free moments with Gus, who had become her confidant, her grounding force. One evening, after a particularly difficult shift, Emily sat with Gus outside the NICU, the weight of the day pressing on her shoulders. She leaned down, her forehead resting against his as she whispered, "Thank you, Gus. I don't know if I could do this without you." Gus responded with a soft lick on her cheek, his warm eyes filled with quiet reassurance. Emily knew he couldn't possibly understand the depth of her gratitude, but in his own way, he seemed to sense her struggles and offered his unwavering support. Their routine became a fixture at the hospital, and soon, the entire staff was invested in Emily's journey. Colleagues would check in, offering words of encouragement and bringing small gifts for Liam. Even Dr. Martinez, who had always maintained a professional demeanor, softened when he saw Emily's determination. He would often linger in the NICU, offering advice on Liam's care and giving Emily subtle reassurances that she was making the right choice. As the adoption process inched forward, Emily's bond with Gus grew even stronger. She felt as though he understood her in ways no one else did. He was her silent partner in this journey, the one who had started it all by bringing Liam to the hospital. In her heart, she began to feel that Gus wasn't just Liam's guardian. He was her guardian, too, a steady force guiding her through every challenge and fear. Through the ups and downs of the adoption process, Emily found strength in Gus's quiet presence, a steadfast reminder that love and loyalty could conquer even the most daunting of obstacles. And as she watched Liam grow stronger each day, she knew that, no matter how long the road, she was ready to build a family, with both of them by her side. As the days passed, Emily's dream of adopting Liam grew stronger. Each morning she would arrive at the hospital and head straight to the NICU, her heart lifting when she saw his tiny, smiling face. Liam had started to recognize her, his eyes lighting up and his little fists waving whenever she leaned over his crib. These moments solidified her decision, erasing any remaining hesitation. Emily had shared her intentions with only a few trusted friends and colleagues, including Anthony and Dr. Martinez, who had been unwavering in their support. They understood the depth of her commitment and, more than anything, believed in her capacity to give Liam the love and stability he deserved. Yet, despite the encouragement, Emily was all too aware of the challenges ahead. The adoption process was strict and unyielding, especially given that she was a single woman with a demanding job. One evening, after a particularly long day, Emily found herself sitting in the hospital courtyard with Gus by her side. She absent-mindedly stroked his fur, her mind heavy with the looming uncertainty. The air was cool, filled with the crisp scent of autumn, and she breathed in deeply, trying to clear her thoughts. "Do you think I'm crazy, Gus?" she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "Trying to raise a baby on my own? Trying to bring him into my life?" Gus gazed up at her with those warm, steady eyes, as if offering silent reassurance. His tail thumped gently against the ground, and he leaned into her, his head resting against her leg. Emily smiled, a faint laugh escaping her lips. "You always know just what to say, don't you?" she whispered, brushing her fingers over his ears. I want to be everything he needs." Her thoughts were interrupted by Anthony's familiar voice. "Mind if I join you?" She looked up, nodding as he took a seat on the bench beside her. He studied her face, his expression softening with empathy. "I can tell you've got a lot on your mind." Emily sighed, nodding. "I keep asking myself if I'm ready for this, if I'm strong enough to be what Liam needs. And the process, it's so intense. The social worker's going to do home visits, interviews, background checks, everything." Anthony placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Emily, you've shown more love and dedication to that child than anyone else in his life. You're already the closest thing he has to family." She looked away, blinking back tears. "It just feels like every time I think I'm making progress, there's another hurdle. And then there's Gus," she added, looking down at the faithful dog by her side. "He's been with Liam every step of the way. I can't imagine one without the other." Anthony nodded thoughtfully. "Well, maybe that's part of the story too. You, Liam, and Gus. It's like you were all meant to find each other. Sometimes, family isn't just about who we're born with. It's about who we choose and who chooses us back." Emily's eyes softened, her heart swelling at his words. She leaned down, wrapping her arms around Gus, who responded with a gentle nuzzle. "Thank you, Anthony. I think I needed to hear that." The following week marked the start of the official adoption process. Emily met with the social worker, a kind but methodical woman named Karen, who would be overseeing her case. Their first meeting took place in a small office, Karen's walls lined with photos of families she had helped form over the years. As Emily sat down, she felt both nervous and hopeful. "So, Emily," Karen began, smiling warmly, "why do you want to adopt Liam?" Emily hesitated, choosing her words carefully. I think he came into my life for a reason. From the moment he was brought into this hospital, I felt this connection, this overwhelming need to protect him. And Gus, he was there from the beginning too. I've never felt this way before, and I know it sounds cliché, but I can't imagine my life without him now." Karen nodded, taking notes. "Adoption isn't an easy path, especially as a single parent. You'll face challenges, sacrifices. Are you prepared for that?" Emily looked down, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Yes, I am. I know it won't be easy, but I'm willing to give him everything I have. I want him to grow up knowing he's loved and safe. I want him to have a real family, even if it's just the two of us. And Gus, of course." Karen smiled, her eyes softening. It's not just about the number of people in a family, Emily. It's about the love and stability they offer. And from what I can see, you have both in spades. Their conversation continued, touching on Emily's work schedule, her support network, and her long-term plans for raising Liam. Karen listened intently, asking questions that were both probing and compassionate, and Emily answered each one with a growing sense of certainty. She felt herself opening up, sharing her hopes and fears, her dreams of giving Liam a life filled with warmth and security. At the end of their meeting, Karen offered her a reassuring smile. "This is just the beginning, Emily. There will be more interviews, a home visit, and evaluations, but I can tell you're in this for the right reasons. Just keep that determination, and you'll get through it." As Emily left the office, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead was daunting, but her heart was steady. She had a vision now, a clear picture of the life she wanted to build, with Liam and Gus by her side. Over the following weeks, she dedicated herself to each step of the process. She prepared her home, transforming her small apartment into a warm, inviting space with a crib, baby blankets, and a few soft toys she had picked out with care. She ensured that Gus had his own cozy spot, a familiar presence in their home. Through it all, Gus remained her constant companion, his gentle presence giving her the strength she needed. And each time she visited Liam in the NICU, she felt their bond deepen, her resolve growing stronger. As the days turned into weeks, Emily knew that, no matter the challenges, she would keep pushing forward. This was her family, a family born from unexpected encounters, from compassion and love. And together, she, Liam, and Gus were ready to face whatever lay ahead. The initial excitement of starting the adoption process soon gave way to the reality of the bureaucracy involved. Emily found herself tangled in a web of paperwork, interviews, and endless appointments with social workers. Every detail of her life was scrutinized: her work schedule, her finances, her personal history. She understood the importance of it all, but the process was grueling, testing her patience and resolve. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, Emily sat on her couch with a stack of documents in front of her. Gus lay at her feet, his presence a calming reminder that she wasn't in this alone. She glanced at him and let out a sigh, her shoulders slumping. "This is tougher than I thought." "Gus," she murmured, rubbing her tired eyes. "They want to know every little thing about me. Every choice I've made, every dollar I've saved, every friend I've ever had." She laughed softly, though the sound was tinged with frustration. "They even asked about you, if you can believe that." Gus lifted his head, looking up at her with those steady, supportive eyes that had become her anchor. She leaned down, giving him a reassuring pat. "But I'm not giving up," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "Liam deserves this. He deserves a family." The next morning, Emily had another interview with Karen, her social worker. They met in a conference room at the hospital, where Karen reviewed her file, her expression thoughtful. "Emily, I won't sugarcoat it. Single-parent adoptions can be challenging," Karen began, her tone gentle but direct. "But I've been reviewing your case, and I see your dedication. I see the lengths you've gone to for Liam. Not every candidate would have done all of this." Emily nodded, trying to hold her emotions in check. "He's been through so much already, Karen. I just want to give him the life he deserves." Karen smiled softly. "And that's clear. But we do need to consider the stability of your situation. You work long hours, and the NICU isn't exactly an environment where you can have flexible shifts." Emily swallowed, her heart sinking. She had anticipated this question, but it didn't make it any easier to answer. "I've already spoken with my supervisor," she explained. "They're willing to let me adjust my schedule, and I have a strong support network. I have friends who are willing to help with childcare if needed." Karen nodded, making notes. "That's good to hear. We'll still need to do a thorough assessment, including a home visit. You'll also need to submit references and complete a parenting course. I'll be honest, Emily. It's a long road ahead." Emily took a deep breath, her voice firm. "I'm ready. Whatever it takes, I'm ready." Over the next several weeks, Emily dove into the process, completing each requirement with unwavering determination. She attended parenting classes, met with childcare specialists, and reached out to friends for references. Every step brought her closer to her goal. Yet each day also brought new challenges, new reminders of just how difficult it would be to make her dream a reality. One day, after another round of interviews, Emily came home feeling defeated. She sank into the couch, covering her face with her hands, her emotions finally bubbling over. Gus, sensing her distress, nudged her arm gently, his head resting on her lap. "Oh, Gus," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. What if they decide I'm not good enough? What if I can't give him the life he needs?" Gus gave her hand a comforting lick, his silent reassurance easing the weight on her heart. She took a deep breath, stroking his fur, letting his presence ground her. "You're right," she murmured, as if he had spoken to her. "We've made it this far. I'm not giving up now." As Emily worked through the adoption process, her friends and colleagues at the hospital rallied around her. Dr. Martinez became an unexpected ally, advocating for her whenever he could, even speaking with the social workers on her behalf. "Emily has shown more compassion and dedication than anyone I know," he told Karen during one of their conversations. "If anyone can give that child a stable, loving home, it's her." Karen was moved by his words, yet her professionalism required her to remain impartial. "I believe she has a lot of love to give, Dr. Martinez. But as you know, this process is rigorous for a reason. We have to ensure that Liam's future is as secure as possible." Dr. Martinez nodded, understanding the delicate balance between procedure and compassion. "All I ask is that you keep an open mind. Sometimes, family isn't about perfect conditions. It's about the people who step up and show up, day after day." Emily has done that. As the weeks turned into months, Emily's commitment to Liam never wavered. Her apartment had transformed into a warm, welcoming space, filled with small reminders of her love for him. She had set up a crib in her bedroom, arranged a cozy corner with baby toys, and even found a small bed for Gus right beside the crib. She envisioned nights where they'd all be together, her small, unconventional family. The final step was the home visit. Karen arrived with a clipboard and a neutral expression, and as she walked through Emily's apartment, she took note of every detail. Emily's nerves were frayed, her heart pounding with every question Karen asked. "Is there anyone who will be able to help you in case of an emergency?" Karen inquired, her voice gentle but probing. "Yes," Emily replied, her voice steady. "I have a close friend who lives nearby, and Dr. Martinez has also offered his support." "I'm not alone in this." Karen nodded, her expression unreadable. She continued her assessment, asking questions about Emily's plans for childcare, her finances, and her long-term vision for raising Liam. At the end of the visit, she closed her clipboard, offering Emily a small smile. "I can see how much you care for him, Emily," she said, her voice soft. "It's clear that you've built a home filled with love. I'll be in touch soon with the final decision." The following days were an agonizing wait, filled with sleepless nights and anxious thoughts. Emily threw herself into her work, trying to keep her mind occupied, but every time she passed the NICU, her heart would race, her thoughts returning to Liam. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Emily received a call from Karen. Her hands shook as she answered, her breath caught in her throat. "Emily, I'm happy to inform you that your adoption application has been approved." Karen's voice echoed through the phone, and for a moment, Emily could hardly believe the words. Tears streamed down her face, her emotions overwhelming her. "Thank you, Karen. Thank you so much." Karen's tone softened. "You earned this, Emily. I've seen the love and dedication you have for Liam. He's a lucky little boy to have you." After ending the call, Emily sank to the floor, her hands covering her face as she wept tears of joy and relief. Gus, sensing the moment, pressed close, his warm fur against her side. She hugged him tightly, whispering, "We did it, Gus. We really did it." In that moment, all the struggles, the sleepless nights, and the endless paperwork faded away. She had her family now, Liam, Gus, and the life she had fought so hard to create. She knew there would be challenges ahead, but with them by her side, she was ready for whatever the future held. On the day Emily brought Liam home, the hospital staff gathered to say their goodbyes. Nurses, doctors, and even a few patients lined the hallway, sharing in the joy of the moment. Liam, bundled in a soft blue blanket, looked around with wide, curious eyes, seemingly unfazed by all the attention. Dr. Martinez stepped forward, his face softened with pride. "Take good care of him, Emily. He's got a big life ahead of him." Emily smiled, tears welling up as she nodded. "Thank you, doctor, for everything." He leaned down to tickle Liam's tiny chin, his voice gentle. "And you, little man, don't give your mom too much trouble, okay?" Liam gave a small coo, his gaze steady, as if he understood. Emily laughed, her heart swelling as she kissed the top of his head. She looked over to Anthony, who was waiting nearby with a small box in his hands. "Hey, Em," he said, smiling as he handed her the box. "Just a little something from all of us." Inside, she found a simple silver locket, engraved with the initials LG for Liam and Gus. The sight of it made her heart skip. She clutched it to her chest, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you, Anthony. I'll cherish this." As they made their way through the lobby, Gus trotted at her side, his eyes watchful, his steps in sync with hers as if he understood the significance of this moment. For weeks, he had been waiting by the NICU doors, watching over Liam, but now he seemed to know that this was a new chapter, a journey he was part of. When they stepped outside, Emily took a deep breath, the fresh air filling her lungs as she looked out over the bustling city. This was it, the beginning of their life together. She carefully secured Liam in his car seat, making sure he was snug, and then opened the passenger door for Gus, who hopped in, settling in with a contented sigh. As she drove home, she glanced in the rearview mirror, watching Liam's peaceful expression as he slept. The road stretched out before her, and for the first time, it felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Back at her apartment, Emily carried Liam inside, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and nerves. Gus trotted in behind her, sniffing around as if inspecting their new home. She set Liam down in his crib, her eyes softening as she watched him sleep. The sight of him there, safe and secure, filled her with an overwhelming sense of purpose. "Welcome home, Liam," she whispered, her voice catching in her throat. "This is your home now." Gus settled beside the crib, curling up as if taking up his post once more, guarding Liam even here. Emily stroked his fur, her fingers running through the soft, tangled strands. "You're part of this family too, Gus. You're his protector, his friend, and you're my family too." As the days passed, Emily, Liam, and Gus fell into a rhythm, learning each other's routines, discovering the joy of small, everyday moments. Emily found herself humming lullabies as she fed Liam in the early hours of the morning, her heart full in a way she'd never known. Gus would often join her, resting his head on her lap as if he too found comfort in the closeness of their new family. Her apartment, once quiet and orderly, now carried the gentle chaos of a life filled with love. Baby toys were scattered across the floor, tiny socks lay draped over the back of the couch, and there were frequent sounds of coos and giggles filling the air. Even the challenges, the late-night cries, the endless diapers, the juggling of work and motherhood, felt like privileges, precious parts of this new life she'd embraced. One evening, after settling Liam down for the night, Emily sat with Gus by her side, looking out over the city lights from her living room window. The locket Anthony had given her hung around her neck, the cool metal pressing softly against her skin. She opened it, revealing the initials inside, a symbol of the journey they had taken together. "You know, Gus," she murmured, her voice filled with gratitude, "I never imagined this for myself, but I don't think I'd want it any other way." Gus looked up at her, his eyes warm and knowing, as if he understood everything she was saying. She rested her head against his, feeling the comfort of his presence, his silent strength. This journey hadn't been easy, but it had brought her to a place of peace, a place where love filled the spaces of her heart she hadn't even known were empty. As she drifted off to sleep that night, Emily felt the completeness of her family. She knew that there would be struggles ahead, moments of doubt and difficulty. But with Liam and Gus by her side, she also knew that they would face it all together. They were, in every sense of the word, a family, a family forged in resilience, loyalty, and a love that had brought them through the darkest of nights into a future filled with light. The first few months were a whirlwind for Emily, a blend of joy, exhaustion, and discovery as she adjusted to life as a mother. Each day brought new milestones and precious memories. Liam's first smiles, his tiny hands reaching up to touch her face, and the way he seemed to light up whenever Gus was nearby. Their little family had found a rhythm, and every evening, as she tucked Liam into bed, Emily felt the weight of her love for him deepen. The hospital staff kept in touch, eager for updates on Liam's growth. Dr. Martinez would stop by with small gifts, and Anthony would visit with treats for Gus, who had become a local legend among their friends and neighbors. Emily cherished these moments of connection, feeling the support of a community that had been with her every step of the way. One autumn afternoon, Emily decided to take Liam and Gus to the nearby park. The air was crisp, and the trees were alive with vibrant shades of red, orange, and gold. She bundled Liam in a soft blanket and placed him in his stroller, Gus trotting along beside them as they made their way through the fallen leaves. At the park, she found a quiet spot under a large maple tree and settled down with Liam in her lap. Gus lay beside her, his eyes half closed, enjoying the warmth of the sun. Emily watched as Liam's tiny fingers reached up, grasping at the colored leaves drifting down from above. She felt a pang of happiness so profound that it took her breath away. "Look at this, Liam," she murmured, holding a bright red leaf up for him to see. "It's your first fall. There's so much beauty in the world, and I can't wait to show it all to you." Gus nuzzled her hand, his tail thumping against the grass, as if sharing in the moment. Emily stroked his fur, marveling at the way he had come into their lives, bringing with him a loyalty that she could hardly comprehend. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the park, Emily felt a quiet peace settle over her. This was her family, the family she had fought for, the family she had chosen. And though the journey had been difficult, every challenge, every sleepless night, had brought her here. The weeks that followed were filled with small, joyful moments. Emily discovered that Liam loved the sound of her singing, and she would hum lullabies as she rocked him to sleep. She'd tell him stories as he lay in her arms, watching his eyes grow heavy as he drifted off. Each night, Gus would settle down by Liam's crib, his head resting on his paws as he watched over him with the same devotion he'd shown from the beginning. One evening, as she tucked Liam into bed and dimmed the lights, Emily leaned down, whispering softly to him, "I promise I'll always be here for you, Liam. You're safe and you're loved, more than you'll ever know." With Gus at her side, she knew she could keep that promise. He had been her silent strength, her unwavering companion, and she often felt that he understood her in ways no one else could. Together, they had built this life, a life filled with love, laughter, and the knowledge that they would face whatever challenges came their way as a family. As winter approached, Emily decorated their small apartment with lights and ornaments, filling the space with warmth and cheer. She hung a stocking for Liam, and beside it, a small one for Gus. On Christmas morning, she dressed Liam in a tiny red onesie, his eyes wide with wonder as he looked at the sparkling lights. Holding Liam close, with Gus nestled beside them, Emily felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had built this life with her own hands, with the help of friends who had become family, and with the love of a loyal dog who had, in so many ways, made it all possible. They spent the day together, enjoying the simple happiness of being with one another. Emily gave Gus a new collar, engraved with his name and a small heart, a token of her love and gratitude for the dog who had brought her and Liam together. Gus wagged his tail, nuzzling her hand as she fastened it around his neck. In the quiet moments of that day, as snow began to fall outside, Emily sat with Liam in her lap and Gus by her side, watching the flakes drift down past the window. She whispered softly, "This is just the beginning, Liam. There's so much ahead of us, so many memories to make. But no matter where life takes us, we'll always have each other." And she knew, in that moment, that this was true happiness, a happiness born from resilience, from love, and from the unbreakable bonds they had forged. She leaned down, kissing Liam's forehead, and rested her hand on Gus's fur, feeling the warmth of her family surrounding her. For the first time in her life, Emily felt whole. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and check out this next story. It's truly moving.